name is Lindsay Thompson, and I can again honestly say, in the words of Dan Ryder, that it has been my honor and privilege to work with the legislators that you see up here with us today. Rather than me introduce them and go through each of their long list of credentials and committees, we're going to jump right into it so we have as much time as possible to talk about the issues. So I'm going to ask each of the legislators first to introduce themselves and then let us know what their priorities are for the upcoming 2022 session. We'll get back to the special session here in a little bit, but I'm going to start with Delegate Gilchrist and ask him to introduce himself and tell us about his 22 priorities.
There we go. Yeah. All right. Very good. Well, it's so good to be here, and I'll just start off very quickly. My name is Delegate Jim Gilchrist. I represent Gaithersburg and Rockville. I'm on the Environment and Transportation Committee, and I chair the subcommittee on natural resources and agriculture. So I see Lindsay a lot. I see representatives in this room a lot, and it's a pleasure to be here today. And, this coming session, we'll be working on a whole range of issues. I'll just mention one right now. I've been in some early talks about permits for stream restorations and how those are progressing and ways we can expedite important stream restoration projects around the state through the permitting process. So that's one of the things we have in store this legislative session, and I'm looking forward to this panel.
Yep, Steve? Or, sorry, Senator Hershey.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Steve Hershey. I'm the senator from the 36th Legislative District, which we commonly refer to as the Upper Eastern Shore. It comprises of Caroline, Cecil, Kent, and Queen Anne's counties. I currently sit on the Senate Finance Committee, where we deal with subject matters such as healthcare policy, business regulation, public utilities, energy, insurance, banking, those types of issues. Very much looking forward to this upcoming legislative session. I think that we still have a lot of work to do, especially regarding some of the issues that are very important to the rural counties. Again, I'm fortunate to represent 4 of them and get a very good idea from meeting with county councils, county commissioners, municipalities on what their big concerns are, as well as the businesses that are out that make up many of the subjects of the Eastern Shore. I think we're going to see some issues, at least I'm looking at, with regards to clean energy policy. Right now, Maryland has a RPS that deals specifically with renewable energy, which has gotten to be very truncated as far as the different types of energy that can be considered renewable. We need to take a look at maybe opening this up to clean energy policies, which would bring in some different types of energy production that I think are very important for the not only for the climate itself, but also for the reliability of the grid, which is a big concern of ours. So I think that's what we'll be looking at least what I'll be looking at specifically in my committee, but I know a lot of other issues will be brought up with regards to health care, which is very important. I think we'll talk about that a little bit later up in the rural counties, but again, very pleased to be here for that. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. Senator Albrecht?
The Thank you so much, Lindsay, and thank you, Charlotte, for inviting me. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Elfrith. I have the privilege of representing District 30 in the State Senate, which you are currently sitting in, so welcome to my district. It's Annapolis, the suburbs, and then South County. So I have, the joke is Maryland is America in miniature, and I think my district is kind of Maryland in miniature, and that I have urban, I have suburban, and I have significant rural parts of my district as well. So I know that this group discussed the broadband bill, and Rick Gordon was here, I think this morning or yesterday morning, to discuss that bill. That's going to be a real focus of mine. It was my bill last session. The governor just appointed me and Senator Hershey to the oversight panel that's going to look at how we spend that initial $400 million across the state, really looking at building out broadband in rural communities, looking at affordability and reliability across the board in all of our communities. So that's going to be a big focus of mine moving into the next session. I serve on the Budget and Taxation Committee, I chair Pensions Committee, and I also serve on the Tri-State Chesapeake Bay Commission, so working with Pennsylvania and Virginia to find regional solutions to protecting the Chesapeake Bay. So I have a lot of environmental work ahead. I also served as a co-chair of the State Parks Investment Commission these last couple of months, and so that is going to be a very large bill and significant funding to really beef up our investment in our precious state parks across the state. And the benefit there is it's going to touch every single part of Maryland, this investment of getting through this maintenance backlog that has been building for decades, addressing some critical maintenance needs, but also looking to the future, looking towards more green infrastructure, looking towards connectivity and trails and things of that nature. So that's going to be a lot of work, but I'm excited for that state parks investment work. And another bill I think is relevant here is the Conservation Financing Act, to bring in the private sector, in addition to the state and local and federal government making investments in meeting our conservation goals, bringing in the private sector to be a partner in that, in stream restoration, in streamline buffers, in all of that work. We really need to diversify our partners, and this bill is going to help us do that. So I know we're going to dig into some issues, but those are just a couple of the things I've been working on and look forward to in the next session.
Great, thanks, Senator. Delegate?
Morning, everyone. Delegate Howard. I represent District 30B, which is just south of where we are now, which is a very rural district, southern Anne Arundel County. I sit on the Economic Matters Committee. I'm on the Business Regs, Alcohol, and Public Utilities Subcommittee. I was very happy to see Andrew here this morning. Him and I served several years together in the House, and I was also happy to hear that about Governor Hogan's continued commitment to ensuring that programs will be accessible and funded. That's going to be one of my major focuses. You know, Senator Elfrith and I were at a Farm Bureau dinner 2 weeks ago, and one of the issues that came up was, for example, tire recycling. It was slashed in half from 1.5 million to 750,000. So I'm designing a letter now to circulate throughout the Anne Arundel County delegation in a bipartisan effort to help to draw attention to things like the Land Preservation Act, smaller things like tire recycling, those type of things that have a direct and positive effect on our rural communities. To bring attention to those, because there has been a lot of shift in leadership in the House. So I want to do what I can, especially through strategy, to bring those issues to the forefront, make sure that those programs are fully funded, at least to level funded or more.
Great, thank you. We got a little preview of what our legislators are working on in the 2022 session. You heard Andrew mention that we will be going into a special session next week, and the primary purpose of that being redistricting as well as the veto overrides. And so I think specific to this audience, it's important to understand what that redistricting could mean for rural Maryland. And so I wanted to ask our legislators, what to expect, as well as how we as rural constituents can be involved in that process. And so I am selfishly going to start with Senator Hershey, as he is my senator, and I'm very interested as to what might happen with my district.
Thank you, Lindsay. Yeah, we all go into a special legislative session on Monday, the 6th. The House and Senate leaders have asked us to block off 2 weeks but I think everybody is under the impression it will really only last 1 week. The important thing that will happen in this legislative session, outside of the vetoes that Governor Hogan had presented back to the General Assembly, is the congressional redistricting map. So I want to make sure that none of us are affected by the maps that will be introduced next Monday, but these are strictly the 8 congressional districts in the state of Maryland. And as Andrew mentioned, there are 2 commissions that went out there to hold public meetings, and as a result, 2 different maps were presented. One was from the governor's independent commission, which was made up, was a bipartisan, or nonpartisan commission, and then one was made up of the presiding officers and legislative leaders from both parties. What I think we're going to end up seeing, obviously, is both maps will be introduced. As far as Lindsay's suggestion on what you can do for that, you better hurry up, because what I understand is that the sign-up for Monday's hearing is already out there. I think it closes today, maybe already. But it's a little bit odd that we have requested sign-ups for testimony on these maps before we have even introduced them. But again, I think that tells us the pace on where we want to see the presiding officers move with this legislative session. As far as my crystal ball, I think that we'll see the legislative commission's map pass. Both the House and the Senate will be sent up to Governor Hogan. Technically, he has 6 days to act on that, which is why they asked us to block off 2 weeks. I think he will be very quick and decisive in vetoing that map and sending it back to the General Assembly, of which another vote will have to take place to either sustain or override the governor's veto. So I think it's going to happen pretty quickly. Colleagues in the party across the aisle from us might have a better insight on that, but that's at least what our side's hearing.
Senator Elfreth, do you have anything to add?
Sure, this is obviously something we have to do every 10 years. It's my first time around. What I'm looking for, my personal priorities in redistricting are more compact districts that make more sense for our communities, more competitive districts. I'm really proud to represent a very purple district. I think it makes me a better legislator to hear from all sides of my community all the time, and I think it would probably do our members of Congress a little better to have more competitive districts and hear from more sides and more perspectives. So those are my priorities going into redistricting. It will take as long as it takes. We'll be sitting there for a long time. But in terms of reaching out, even if you cannot testify at Monday's hearing, I would encourage you to reach out to your legislator and be solutions-oriented and tell us what you are looking for in a congressional map that you think best represents your community. And if your legislator's any good, they'll respond to you.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah.
If I could just add something that's important that Senator Elfreth kind of alluded to. These maps are introduced in the form of a bill, a piece of legislation. And so they can be amended. I think it's important that everybody recognizes that. When we go through the public hearings, these maps can be amended. So it is still important, as Senator Elfreth said, I think we all want to see compact districts. We want to see communities stay together. So if you see something that you don't like with either of the maps, it is important for the public to get involved and testify. And again, just because it's introduced in a certain manner does not mean at the end of the day that's what it's voted.
Great, thank you. I'm going to shift a little bit, still same question, but shift a little bit to the veto override. So I'm going to start with Delegate Gilchrist. Is there anything that you're hearing or anything that you know of as a priority for the veto overrides going into the special session?
The Maryland Constitution says that we bring up vetoes at the next session after the governor vetoes them. I mean, sometimes during regular session, if a bill is passed early, I mean, Senator Hershey said he has 6 days to sign the map or not, or veto the map. During session, there's 10 days. So we will take up the vetoes from last session at this at the next session, as the Constitution allows. There's always the possibility these could be special ordered and put off, but I fully expect that we'll take up the range of vetoes and act on them next week.
Thank you. And Delegate Howard, are there any vetoes that you feel it is important for rural Maryland for the legislature to sustain as opposed to override?
None that I'm aware of, but I know that there's a myriad of vetoes that are going to come up for override. And Delegate Gilchrist is right. I mean, we could separate some of those out and have some debate on them. We did just get a list for the Republican caucus 2 days ago about veto overrides, and if anybody wants to speak on some of those, I'm still reviewing that list. But none that come to the forefront of my mind.
Senator Elfreth, is there anything that you'd like to add on the veto overrides before we shift?
Sure, just my process is, I look at the bills that are going to be in front of us, I look at the governor's veto letter to understand kind of where his mind was with the veto. And as Andrew mentioned, many of those were fiscal. We were in a different fiscal situation just 9 months ago. And then I look at the original votes, and were they a bipartisan vote? And that's going to give me a little more leeway to make my decision. There is one, I now have 4 veto badges that I'm pretty proud of, but one of them, just this last year, I think is important. It has to do with transparency and accountability of our Board of Public Works, and when they decide to make cuts, regardless of who is on that Board of Public Works. Right now, they only have to give us their list of cuts 5 days in advance of the meeting, and the meetings are on Wednesdays, so we get them Friday. And I don't think that's enough time, and I think we experienced in the last major round of cuts, enough time for our communities to rally and provide their input to the 3-member board. So we had a bill last year that extends that time period to allow for more public input into those cuts, so I am looking forward to overriding that particular bill. I think it does bring accountability and transparency to that process.
I'm going to ask Senator Hershey, are there any specific bills that you're looking to sustain before we move on to a happier topic?
Yeah. Again, not anything specific, but just when it comes to vetoes and the process, it's fairly politicized. There are a lot of bills that are on the governor's veto list that went through the Senate 47-0 or 45-2, bills that we all voted on. And as Senator Elfreth said, it's very important that we as legislators take a look at where the governor's frame of mind is on why he vetoed this. And many times it does have to do with a fiscal note. And so many times there are things that just had a larger cost than we might have projected in our legislative process. So I think in most cases you kind of see a pretty partisan activity with regards to vetoes. But there are certainly a few out there, especially some that are related to the crime bills that were passed and changed dramatically from both the House and the Senate that you'll probably hear some pretty fierce debate on that. And maybe 1 or 2 are subject to being sustained, but we'll have to see.
Great, thank you. So Senator Elfreth touched on this a little bit, but I think it's important to note that rural Maryland and rural issues are not a Democrat-Republican divide, right? We have a lot of legislators in the Maryland State Senate and in the House that are on both sides of the aisle that are very supportive of our issue, right? Whether they have rural areas in their district or not. And so I wanted to give each of the legislators the opportunity to tell us about what it is they're doing or planning to do in the upcoming session to help support rural Maryland, our issues, and our priorities. So I'm going to start with Delegate Howard.
Sure. Well, I touched on it a little bit earlier in my opening statements, so I'll be brief. But again, reaching out strategically, trying to bring issues of funding for programs to the forefront. There's been a lot of House leadership changes. So I think that one of the best ways to approach it, as far as bringing those issues to the forefront, making sure the land preservation is fully funded, the mouth is fully funded, to continue to do that is in a bipartisan manner, because you're 100% correct. The economic drivers in my district are the Bay and farms. And this is not a Democrat or Republican issue. This is an economic driver and a community issue. I don't approach it like that. I don't think anybody on this panel approaches it like that, and I'm certain that members of the delegation don't. So I'm looking forward to bringing those issues to the forefront. I was very glad to hear about the governor wanting to continue with that. With some of the economic rebound that we're seeing, based on sales tax revenue and federal dollars coming in, I think we've got a good shot at seeing some of the budget requests that, I've got the letter here from September 24th from Chair Hartline and Executive Director Davis talking about 9 million versus 6 million in 2023. I think we've got a good shot at some of that, but I think what we need to do is present sort of a united bipartisan front on these issues. And the way you do that, the way at least I'm going to approach it, is through the House delegation.
Awesome, thank you. Senator?
I mentioned I serve on the Budget and Tax Committee, and Senator Jackson, who also represents the very rural community as well, serves there with me. And so we will be going to bat for your priorities. I've never heard the word structural surplus before in my career until about 2 months ago. So it's a pretty exciting time to be on the Budget Committee. But working with you, hear your priorities on land preservation, on technical assistance to farmers, on, as the delegate mentioned, even some of the smaller programs that can be, the difference between red and black for many small farms. Those are the projects that I will be going to bat for in the back room of the Budget Committee. Also ensuring that broadband money is spread out across the state equitably in the way that it's most needed. I'll throw another wrench in here because I think it's a statewide issue, is childcare. If we are truly going to rebound economically, we're going to have to fix what is now a broken system, particularly post-pandemic. And that's important for every part of my district. I know in South County, we have a real gap in childcare providers. We need young parents to get back to work. We're going to have to think more creatively about that. I'm going to surprise the delegate because I'm not sure if it's a legislative priority, but something I'd like to work on is bringing a magnet program for agriculture to Anne Arundel County. Working with North Hartford High, for instance, Senator Gallion's district, to see how they've done it and see if we can't do that at Southern High in our district, to make sure that we're providing a pipeline and opportunities for young people in at least Southern Anne Arundel County who want to enter post-high school careers in ag and tech can do so. So just a couple of the priorities that I'm excited to work on.
Yeah, I would love to do that. I've sponsored bills in the past that sort of, I don't know the best term in the world, but kind of waive off some of the college money that kids would owe when they go into things that would be considered the ag field. So yeah, this has always been one of my priorities. I've been in the House 7 years. Hopefully I'll continue through the next election. It's always been one of my priorities. I've been successful legislatively with helping the rural communities and the ag communities and our farmers. And yeah, absolutely, I'm happy to declare in front of a room full of people. Yeah, I'm happy to work with you on that.
All right, we have that on record. We're going to get an ag VOTEC program in Anne Arundel County. So I'm a huge proponent for ag VOTEC programs. You saw in Farm Credits videos earlier, the agricultural workforce, it's not just being a farmer. You could be a geneticist or a chemist or a mechanic. So all of those things are so important to continuing to provide a safe and affordable food system for Marylanders. I'm going to turn it over to Senator Hershey to tell us a little bit about your priorities for rural Maryland.
Well, first, let me just go back to a couple things that were mentioned. Many of us see how politicized Washington, D.C. is and what we see on different network television shows and things of that nature. But I think all of us can attest that Annapolis is very different than that. Certainly from our side of the aisle, it is very, very important that we have relationships with our colleagues to help us bring the issues that are very important to rural Maryland into their eyesight so that they're aware of these types of things. I'm proud of the last 3 years. I worked with Senator Melanie Griffith and Delegate Emily Shetty on a very important telehealth bill that the General Assembly passed just before we were released for the COVID pandemic. And a little bit of foresight in that legislation, but Senate President Bill Ferguson came to me and he says, hey, I think you're the right person to kind of lead this through. It's very important for us because of the benefits that not only do we see everywhere with telehealth, but certainly out in the rural areas where it's much more difficult to get the adequate healthcare services that we need. So we were able to do that the year before. I see Matt there. We worked with Delegate Sample Hughes to get to deregulate Chop Tank Electric and allow them to start providing broadband services. Again, specifically out to the rural counties, but Delegate Sample Hughes certainly is a legislator from the Eastern Shore, but it took a lot of effort from her on the House side to get that passed. So everything that we do, we need some assistance, and I'm happy to say that in most cases we are able to get the important needs from the rural community into the General Assembly and kind of focus on those. We always see healthcare as an issue in the rural areas where there's just lack of facilities. I represent two of the only two counties in the state of Maryland that do not have a hospital. So obviously anything that we talk about with Shore Regional Health, University of Maryland Medical Systems, and trying to make sure that we have adequate healthcare services is very important. And I think we've done an outstanding job, and many of you guys are very familiar with the freestanding medical facility that just opened in Cambridge. That was a big departure from standard acute care hospitals that were not necessarily giving the exact services that a community needs, and we were able to pass legislation years ago to allow for freestanding medical facilities to reach that need. We had a very important implementation of a mobile wellness unit that just came in to help Kent and Queen Anne's County, northern Queen Anne's County, where this mobile health team will go to different areas or trusted areas in the community, firehouses, places of worship, where they would go and be able to provide healthcare services to those. So you were actually coming to the healthcare in a mobile type of setting. Charlotte, thank you very much. We have a $125,000 grant from RMC to help us with that program. But those are the types of programs that I think we're seeing and will continue to see in the General Assembly with regards to rural counties.
Great, thanks, Steve. And last but certainly not least, Delegate Jim Gilchrist. He mentioned that he serves as the chair of the Natural Resources and Agriculture Subcommittee in the House. And the House and the Senate operate pretty differently when it comes to the committees. You know, a lot of the Senate committees don't have subcommittees. Everything is considered by the full committee. But, you know, most of my issues specifically go to Delegate Gilchrist's subcommittee. And I can honestly say that he's my go-to on my issues. You know, even though, again, it's not a Democrat-Republican issue. He's thoughtful, he's open. And so I really appreciate working with you on that subcommittee and wanted to give you a chance to talk about your priorities for rural Maryland.
Well, thank you, Lindsay. And the way we run the subcommittee and the Environment and Transportation Committee, you know, we get a lot of the hunting bills, agricultural bills, all the bills that deal with natural resources. And we don't like to recreate the hearing. We try not to recreate the hearing. But having subcommittee, you know, and last session we would have it on Zoom, and it would give us some chance to sort of review what we heard, give advocates like Lindsay a chance, you know, to give their 40 seconds to remind us of what was important or unimportant about the bill. And we can do that with the watermen and women. We can do that with the representatives from the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Natural Resources. And we you know, of course, these are all public meetings, and we try to, you know, in advance, we will notify people when those are. So we really try to collaborate with everyone. I appreciate your comments, Lindsay, because that is what we try to do. As for what we do, what the specific priorities of the subcommittee might be this coming session, you know, sometimes we don't know. And I'll just say, about 10 years ago, Charlotte Davis walked into my office, you know, maybe a week before the filing deadline of bills. And she asked me to put in a bill as a placeholder. I wouldn't be the permanent sponsor. And I was happy to do that for Rural Maryland Council. And I do want to thank John Hartline and Charlotte Davis for for all the work they've done to put this on. And so I was happy to put it in for the Rural Maryland Council. And I was sort of surprised a couple weeks later when she said, well, you know, actually you will be the lead sponsor. And I'm wondering if maybe today Charlotte will tell me what was in that bill. But I do appreciate working with everyone, and a lot of people in this room have been in my office working on issues, and I always look forward to it, and I look forward to this coming session.
Thank you so much. So we talked a little bit about the upcoming session earlier. I did want to give each of you an opportunity if you have a priority bill that you already know about, or if you know of other bills that you think that we should be aware of going into the 22 session. So I'll start with Senator Elbridge.
I mentioned the State Parks Investment Commission work that we're doing, and there's a lot of land preservation and acquisition funding and things like that that I think is important to the rural community. So that's a big one to watch, but frankly, just the budget and really being concerted in your budget requests. This is the year particularly for one-time kind of spending projects. What we don't want to do is commit ourselves in tremendous amount of operating to then get ourselves back into a structural deficit. So really getting focused on one-time expenditures that are important to the rural community is important. I'm thinking of SMATIC's priorities, getting the RAC built and up and running for all 5 counties, but something that helps our county as well. So really being laser focused and prioritizing those one-time investments that are really going to be, frankly, once in a generation kind of projects that we have the ability now to fund. I recommend you doing that. And please copy my office on all of those requests so I can also be a champion for you in the back room.
That's really helpful, thank you. Delegate Howard?
So some bills that might be coming through ECM that we should be aware of, especially when it comes to farms and small businesses that they are the paid family and medical leave bill. This is a concerning bill. This is a second in the nation. Washington State has put this bill in. It's very, very broad. It talks about contributors on the employee and the employer side for paid family medical leave. It's very broad definitions. Now, again, we've got to have a bill hearing, and the devil's in the details. But right now, I'm very concerned about this bill, especially when, in the letter that Chair Hartline and Chair Executive Davis said, that the rural areas are still recovering from some of the economic recessions and those type of things. So this type of legislation worries me because you're looking at fund solvency in the future. If there is a fund that does get used up by people taking paid family medical leave, how is that going to be adjusted? That's going to be done by the employer, which a lot of our farms are. And also too, I'm a little concerned about conversations I'm hearing about the eliminating of the steps for the rest of the minimum wage. That was settled. I was part of that, and that was settled legislation and negotiated and settled legislation. So those are 2 things specifically that I think we should be worried about statewide. And again, in our rural areas, these will have a direct and potentially negative impact because the chair and the executive director are 100% correct. I'm a retailer. I've been in the retail business for 17 years. You can still see, hear, smell, and feel some of the effects of the economic recession. And then when you compound this with COVID, and then you compound this with rural areas, we have to approach it with a very, very careful mindset. So those are 2 things that are on my radar that I'm concerned about.
Delegate Gilchrist? Any of your priority bills or bills that you think that we should pay special attention to in the 22 session?
Well, I'll just mention again, I'm working on a stream restoration bill. We're hearing that the projects are taking too long to receive their permit. So we're in the early stages of talking to the advocates about what a bill would look like and how we can move forward on that. And it'll probably be of interest to the rural community.
Absolutely. Delegate Hershey, anything you'd like to add, or Senator? Sorry. I'm just calling you all kinds of...
I know.
I did know him when, he said you knew me when, so I knew him before he was a delegate,
That's right.
so.
I think a big issue that we finally need to address is the taxing of retirement and pension income in our seniors. I've spoken with a colleague of mine on the Budget and Tax Committee. The Senate seems to be willing to try to do something with that, even if it has caps or some types of restrictions. But it's certainly one of the biggest issues that the governor will continue to talk about. But especially in the rural areas, we just seem to be losing so many of our residents because of high property taxes, because of the taxes that are on the retirement income, to states like Delaware that don't tax retirement income, or states like North Carolina and South Carolina that are not taxing pensions. And, volunteers, one of the things that's very different between rural counties and sometimes some of the bigger counties is we rely so much on volunteers. Whether it's volunteer fire departments, whether it's people that come in and contribute to organizations that are out there helping. And these are the type of people that we seem to be losing, or we're losing a bit more of. So I think it's important that we finally find a way to address this. It is probably one of the biggest issues that I get as far as constituent contacts and constituent service issues of can we do something. I'm just hoping it's an election year and people want to have something good to tell all their constituents that they did, and maybe we can get something through this year.
Lindsay, if Delegate Howard made a commitment, and I'll make a commitment to Senator Hershey, it's something that impacts everybody across Maryland, is this retiree issue. And my own parents, retired to Delaware for very similar reasons. So it's something that I know conversations are happening right now, and that is, I think, one use of the structural surplus that I think is really healthy to keep Marylanders in Maryland and make it more affordable. So I commit that I will do all I can.
There we go. We're getting work done on the legislative panel today. It's very exciting. Yeah. So I think hot off the press officially today, we found out that the House hearings are going to be virtual again, and that you will be required to have an appointment to enter the House office buildings. I don't think we've seen anything official on the Senate side yet, but something that I think is important that I'd like to point out is having and building relationships with your legislators before you have a problem, right? Before you have an issue that you're supporting or opposing during the legislative session, building those relationships with your legislators is so important so that you have that access and that familiarity with them when you do need something during session, right? So I was wondering if anybody had any pointers or suggestions for the residents and constituents here on, what's the best way to advocate for their issues in this seemingly virtual environment where we're not having those hallway conversations.
Just talk to us. I've served in the Marine Corps and the Army, and it's shocking to me. I talk to people every day that have no idea that these committee hearings are open, voting sessions are open, subcommittees are live streamed. Just talk to us. I love to talk to people. I can think I've been in the House 7 years. I did it one time that I've had people come down and just introduce themselves. It was fantastic. I loved it. Let me know the issues that are important to you. Let me know when I've done a good job. Let me know when I've done a bad job. That's fine too. I've been yelled at before.
I would not suggest yelling at your legislators.
But do not hesitate to reach out. I've had the same cell phone number for 20 years, and I put it out publicly. It's on Facebook. It's on my website. I have people instant message me at 10 o'clock at night. And I know everybody at this table feels the same way, is, especially with the advent of social media, this is not a 9-to-5 job. So the reality is when I'm smoking a cigar on my deck at 9:30, 10:30 at night, 11:30, 1:30 in the morning, and somebody contacts me because they have a DLOR issue or there's some issue going on, I respond to that, period. Because it's not a 9-to-5 job. And I really look forward to constituent interaction. So do not hesitate to contact your legislator in any way, shape, or form. we crave it. So, thank you.
Well, I was yelled at just last week, but, and, not by Seth, but, aside from the Senate, I teach at Towson University. I teach political science and public policy and advocacy, so we have a whole class on how to kind of productively advocate. And Seth mentioned social media. It's a great tool, but it's really difficult for us and our staff, and my staff, Dylan, is here in the back, he would say this too. It's hard for us to track that stuff. So if you tag us, especially in a comment, us and our staff, we can't track it anywhere, so it's very difficult to respond. So really having a written record in our email, and even when people call us, we ask, can you please put this in an email, because we want to make sure our staff and we can address it properly. As I mentioned before, being solutions-oriented, if you don't like a map, if you don't like a bill, come to us with exactly what you don't like, and if you can, a solution instead of just having a problem, because we're going to see at least 3,500 pieces of legislation. I am also on the committee responsible for $55 billion of the budget. So we are juggling things constantly, and a priority for you will be a priority for us, but if you could understand that we have probably 100 that day, that would be very helpful. And just bringing us, like I said, solutions and being positive. We make ourselves, I think a test of a legislator is whether you make yourself available to your community. And we had virtual office hours last session, we'll do it again this session. But reach out over email, reach out over the phone, and if, like I said, a legislator is worth their salt, we'll respond to you.
Very helpful. Anything to add, gentlemen?
I'll just add, when we are debating legislation or going through the bill hearing process, how important it really is to hear from individuals with real life stories. We certainly have our subject matter advocates that are very important to the process to really educating us on the issue that might be before us. But the stories from individuals, from businesses that come in and they're able to help let everybody know in a committee how this is going to affect them, how it might benefit them, how it might hurt them, is very important as we go forward in the voting sessions. As Delegate Howard said, up until recently, the voting sessions certainly weren't televised. And I think a few might have been available on the audio. But that's really where a lot of these bills are formed, as far as what comes in, what we've heard, what we're able to talk to our colleagues about, and how we can shape a piece of legislation in the committee process. Much more so than we see on the floor of either the House or the Senate. I mean, by that time, most of us really respect the committee process and understand that if a committee report comes out, that we feel that they have done the best that they can to get that bill in the position that in a sense we could all vote for. But that work happens at the committee level, and again, it's very important to hear real life stories on the effects of this legislation and what we might be passing or changing.
Last session was so different. I used to spend the days in my office, and it could happen that every few minutes someone would come in to see me, and that was just so different last session. There was none of that. I mean, and there were some Zoom meetings, but I just found, and I think it was felt by the advocates and the lobbyists and the agencies and the departments, that we missed seeing each other in the hallway so we could confer on what was going on. And Seth said his cell phone number is on his website. Well, I don't have much of an active website. But as Peter Francho, the comptroller, did earlier today, he gave out his cell phone number. Mine 301-452-4082. And follow up with me after if you missed that. But I missed that we were going to have the same procedures for this session. I understand it's just announced. And I understand, there's good reasons to do that. So we're working on ways, to keep communication available.
Great, and maybe we'll have to resort to the outdoor boxed lunch run-through again for Rural Maryland Day, which was very, very successful. Although now everybody else knows about the idea, so we might have to get that permit in early. So we have a few minutes left, so since I have the microphone, I'm going to make a decision. If anyone has any questions from the audience for our legislators or any issues that you specifically wanted to bring to their attention, we probably have time for a couple. John, of course.
I'm just going to mention one thing, maybe I'm emboldened by Senator Edwards last night saying you're not going to get it if you don't ask. But at the Tri-County Council, we've been working on non-emergency health transportation from the rural areas now for, I guess, going on 4 years. Charlotte's saying, hey, it's time to take the training wheels off. But what we were able to find out was there are a group of people in the rural areas that don't have any means for transportation whatsoever. And a lot of people assume that the federal government does things. What we found, two things. Number one is the standard transportation, you have to live within 3/4 of a mile of a bus route. And in southern Maryland, that leaves out half of the area. And the second part of that is, if you have a car title in your name, you cannot get transportation from the federal government. And old people have a car sitting up on blocks. They've never done anything about it. A lot of times they're widows or widowers, and they can't get transportation. Now, we can help them, but the federal government process takes 60 to 90 days. We have to fill that gap before that. And I can tell you, when you go to the hospital, and they just had a recent health event, and they dump you out on the street at 10:30 at night and say, oh, get an Uber and drive to Southern Maryland from downtown DC, that's not going to happen. So we have to look at that problem. In the state, the system's designed so that you go from a rural area to an urban place to get fixed. And then you don't have any way to get home. So that's something I'd like the legislature, while they have money, to take a look at. Thank you.
You said that's federal?
The federal money, but if you haven't had a emergency, if you haven't had a health event, I'm 70. If you haven't had a health event, guess what? You're probably not prepared. It's like the pandemic. You get ready for it when it happens. But the first time you have to come home, or the first 2 or 3 times you have follow-up visits, there's no transportation.
So I think the ask is, there's the federal program out there. Is there a state program that could be set up to fill that gap between eligibility for the federal program, which certainly having a car title in your name does not mean that we want you to drive.
Well, and that's what I was just thinking about is just very quickly, 10-second sort of thought pattern on this is there something that we can do at the state level as far as an affidavit, maybe? I don't know. There might be some legislation that we can do on the state level to remove that barrier as far as the titling is concerned. So at least that would take care of some percentage of these folks in some way, shape, or form. So yeah, follow up.
Just baby steps.
Yeah,
in the right
yeah.
direction. That's
Yeah.
all we need.
Absolutely. Okay.
Thank you.
We do have time for maybe one more question, if anybody has a question or.
Can I ask a question? We're talking about property tax, which is paid mostly at a county level. But like my mother here, she's not consuming any services from the county. Her grandchildren are even out of school. My father did. So it's a burden on her to pay property tax. It doesn't seem like much, but it's $3,200, that's a lot. Is there any way the state in some way either rebate part of that back, or to keep retired people in their homes, and especially she's in a very far suburban area, she's very stable. So can you somehow work it out through the county? I mean, because you're going to end up giving the money to the county, I guess. I mean, that's not a way of a transfer tax. But what we could do with that, and on the congressional districts, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, before we had rural districts, I didn't know very much about rural communities when I graduated from law school. I ended up moving to Marianna, Florida, to the Department of Children and Families. And also you realize it's a whole world of different issues that you can live right next to a rural community right now. So like the first and the sixth congressional district, there's ways to move them around but still keep them rural. Like the two different maps. They're right now taking Indian Harris district, the first district, and they're getting rid of the rural part of northern, Harford County, Harford County and Walker County and Carroll County, and they're giving them a very urban area, which is very different. And then they're going across you're in Rutherford County, but it's very different. Yet in Rutherford County, still has a lot of rural community. So if you want to take that away, advance the government director, whoever is empowering the state, why not end it on the eastern shore, but then come across like it used to be, southern Anne Arundel County, because they're still, you go either way, and then western rural, and going down to Washington, why not go across the north? Because, when you have a representative in Congress that isn't really that familiar, I mean, if you live in the 6th district, you not be familiar with rural concerns.
Yeah.
So it's like, if there's something we could do, at least those two districts.
Yeah.
So rural people have, rural areas can have representation, be it any kind of Democrat or Republican, I don't care, but at least someone who's concerned with their issues.
Yeah, compact and contiguous.
Yeah,
When you look at Anne Arundel County itself, southern Anne Arundel needs, because of the rural nature, which I represent, is very different from northern Anne Arundel County, so you're 100% correct. And that's one of the things I'm going to be looking at when I'm looking at these maps, is two words, compact and contiguous. Not contiguous because of low tide, not things that look like a seagull wing, this type of stuff, but compact and contiguous and representative of the area.
Yes, I definitely think it's important to have, rural districts that are rural. That's a great point. And maybe the issue of retiree property tax rebates could be something that would be tied in with the other retiree issue you're working on.
If I can address that, because New Jersey has a really interesting program where they freeze property taxes after, I think it's 65, and that at least gives a little relief for retired folks on fixed incomes. But you're exactly right. At the state level, we would be crucified by certain counties if we passed property tax laws and then didn't pay for them. So we have to be, partners with our counties in figuring out this particular challenge. So thank you for your idea.
Anything that you guys would like to add on either of those two issues? All right. As a meeting manager, I always strive to end on time or early. So we certainly appreciate all of your time and your willingness to be here and talk about all of these important issues, and of course your support of rural Maryland today and every day. So if you would join me in thanking our legislators for joining us.